Hello and welcome back. Today I want to look at why our country does not work. The theme of my argument has been that we need to renegotiate the social contract. But what does that mean exactly? I look at the social contract as the underlying agreement between the state and us, the citizens. This contract has the foundation of why we exist as a state and the responsibility of both the state and us, the citizens. Our country does not work because we were not party to the social contract on which this country is founded upon. This is what I mean. We were founded as a colony of the British Empire. The British wanted this land to be settled by settlers because in their view, we the natives could not provide the economic foundation that they wanted for this colony. And so when the government of this nation was instituted, and here by government I mean not only the legal framework but also the underlying framework of how this country works, our needs and interests were never considered. The British advertised this country as a place where people could get cheap, arable, productive land and cheap labor. We were the people to provide the cheap labor. Our lands and our resources was what was supposed to entice the settlers. Fast forward and independence, Kenya came, but the people who have been in charge have not seen the need to change this foundational framework. And this manifests itself in how different groups in this country access economic opportunities. The Europeans, some of whom still farm and others who have settled in other businesses, still take the giant pie of the economic opportunities in this country. And when I say giant pie, I mean their share of our nation's benefit vis-a-vis their number is astronomically high, especially compared to us, the Africans. Though the Indians came here mostly because of building the railway, the British had also considered making Kenya a settler colony for the Indians. But for once, racism worked. This is the same case with the suggestion of settling the Jews here. But this foundational framework of giving foreigners benefit of a native has carried on through. The Indians have better opportunities than us. The Chinese have better opportunities than us. And in some way, our political leadership have been able to create an environment where for you to be able to extract value from this country without even having to invest anything back or without having to provide the prerequisite investment, all you have to do is have a little bit of money. And this explains why most foreigners, especially non-African foreigners, get to enjoy the best perks of this country. They have more economic opportunities than us. Our resources have been primed for the access and exploitation. And even the things that are supposed to be ours by right, access to our natural resources, the things that make us feel proud to be Kenyans, those things that make us unique, our national parks, all those items are primed in a manner that they serve foreigners first and then Africans, if there are any takers. But this cannot be the foundation of a state in which we are the majority. We, the Africans, we, the people who are natives of this land, we cannot continue to live in a country where we are second-class citizens, where our value or our interests are valued after everyone else have had their fill. So when I say we need to renegotiate the social contract, my thought process is we need to create a nation in which our needs and interests come first. That we are the primary beneficiaries of the benefits of this economy. That the resources we are endowed with benefit us first before they benefit anyone else. But to be able to make a case as to why we need to renegotiate the social contract, it is important to point out where the current contract falls short. To do this, we need to understand the logic behind the foundation of a state. A state is defined as a nation or territory considered as an organized political community under one government. A more comprehensive description of a state and why it exists would be: nations are formed and operate as states to exercise authority and control over a defined territory to ensure the security, well-being, and interests of their citizens. That is the modernized version of the social contract that exists between nations and their citizens, especially ones that keep parroting their foundational framework as democracies or societies where the will of the majority carries the day. However, the only bit of that definition where our state qualifies is with regards to exercising control over a defined territory. Our government is always keen to ensure that we understand that it is the authority over the geographical region called Kenya. The government goes the extra mile to ensure that it enforces its control over this territory. That is why when the Kikuyus demanded the colonialists to leave, who are by then the primary beneficiaries of this country, the reaction was over 100,000 killed, over 300,000 interned, and an entire community put in prison-like villages for re-education purposes, which by all means was a program meant to reprogram the understanding or the relationship our ancestors had with the state. When the Somalis complained and wanted to join their brothers across the borders, the same high-handedness was witnessed when 5,000 of their people were mowed down in a dusty airfield in one afternoon. The other day, the people of Mombasa tried to have some version of a discussion on why they ought to be allowed to be independent because this country does not provide the benefit it is supposed to provide to its citizens. The men and women who are advocating for that were classified as terrorists. And with that classification, the authority to disappear them, the authority to kill them without question, and just to brutally bring that conversation to an end. Even more recently, there was a suggestion once proposed by Devindi that people who felt left out of government should be allowed to form an independent nation outside of what was said to be the Kikuyu Kalenjin dominance. That mere suggestion almost saw the broadcasting house that had hosted him lose their broadcasting rights. In all of this, one would assume that given how much effort successive governments have reinforced their control over this territory, one would assume that there have been similar efforts to ensure that this country is of benefit to its inhabitants. But that is where the social contract ends. Our government has gone out of its way to ensure that it does not provide us with the essential services, nor avail opportunities to ensure that we prosper. The only bit of the contract our government is keen on enforcing is with regards to the responsibilities of us, the citizens, which largely boils down to taxation, an agreement that we allow the government to do whatever it wants. But what are these services that our government has failed tremendously to provide for? It is my belief that a government has at least 5 essential services that it ought to provide to its people. It ought to provide education, it ought to provide healthcare, it ought to provide for security, it ought to provide for food security, and it ought to provide for essential infrastructure. I mean, things that the private sector cannot take up. But if you look at our country, there is no single service, at least the 5 services I've mentioned, where we can say our government has provided adequate services to us. What do I mean? I will begin with security. Our security infrastructure is still based on the colonial model where the police and all the security apparatus are meant to protect and ensure that the interests of the elite are protected from the wrath of we the masses. What we assume is a policing force is actually an organized crowd management entity. The police are here to keep us in order. They are not here to serve us. They are not here to ensure justice is done for us. No, the police are here to ensure that we remain in line. And whenever we fall out of that line, they are very quick to react to ensure that we are reminded of our position in our social contract. And this is why from their training, they are taught that we, the people of this country, we the locals, what they term as Raya, are somehow inferior, somehow inadequate. We are men and women who need to be disciplined, who need to be brutalized to understand how government works, to understand how state works. They assume that we don't know what our interests are, that they are better positioned to tell us what our interests are. And to understand how much this mindset is ingrained, the police still live in huts that mirror those the colonialists built in the villages for their home guard. Our police are poorly compensated. They are poorly trained. The only bit of wiggle room the police have is with regard to the contract they have with the state. The state mistreats them, underpays them, but it allows them to levy illegal taxes on us. Or the men and women who are supposed to keep our state in check look the other way when the police brutalize us, extort us, and do as they will with us, because in our social contract, the state and its machinery serve the elite. We are here to provide labor. We are here to provide security for loans. That is our contribution. We only get the responsibilities bit of our citizenship contract. The rights are something the government varies depending on the day. And that is why ordinary Kenyans every single day complain about the inadequacies of the police, but there are no changes. This is a culture that has been carried on from our foundation. It may come as a surprise to most people, but until the 1950s, Africans were largely not policed. The existing infrastructure of the police was meant to ensure that the colonialists and the settlers felt safe when they explored this land. But we are the primary in this country. It is not in our interest to continue funding an organization that never holds up its end of the bargain towards us. The police are paid with our taxes. They are housed with our taxes. Their part in the budget is even regulated in a manner that we are not even allowed to question because we are told it is for our security. But the police are not here for our security. The police extort us as much as the political class and as much as the criminal underworld that exists in our country. The second essential service the government is supposed to provide is education. Now, if you ask the average Kenyan, one of the benefits of colonialism was supposed to be education. But if you actually check on our history, the colonial government never put in resources towards ensuring we were educated. They outsourced that service to the missionaries. Now, the missionaries did do a bit of work to ensure we had the tools of modernity. But the primary goal of the missionaries was indoctrination. And that is why they had rules like you had to convert first to Christianity before you get the benefits. During the fight for independence, they sided with the government against the locals because, in their view, their interests were better secured when our whole way of life was changed to meet the needs of the colonialist. A more meek us was better for the missionaries. And that was the cost of that outsourcing, that the missionaries can provide the education to the locals, but they get to choose what type of education they get to provide. And that is why our education system is very keen on training us to be clerks. Whatever our education system is, it is a ranking system to find out who amongst us can be the best clerk, who amongst us can be the best bookkeeper, who amongst us can be trusted enough to oversee the estates or the interest of the elite. Fast forward and we get our independence. It would have been assumed, given that now we are a free nation, there would be more effort to ensure more of us have these tools of the future. But that is not what happened. The government of the day still decided to outsource the service, but this time to the private sector. And unlike the missionaries whose goal was, we will provide education if you allow us to indoctrinate, the private sector has but one goal: profit maximization. The bit of education that is provided by the private sector is done in a business-like manner. Profits are primary, and maybe we get education. In order to understand how uninvested our government is in our education as a country, look at it this way. At independence, one of the scourges we were supposed to deal with was ignorance. But since then, there has not been any effort to ensure that education is actually available to everyone. And when I say available, I don't mean classes and a certificate that says you have gone to either class 8 or form 4. I mean actual education. Education provides people with the tools to survive in this world. Because whether we like it or not, the one thing that colonialism showed us was that in the hierarchy of human progression, our ancestors were a bit behind. That is why we were easy to conquer. That is why we were easy to control, because we had not acquitted ourselves with the latest tools of modernism. And this has carried on to this day. And to show you how far our government is willing to go to ensure that lesser and less people are educated, the latest education funding model for higher education is the best example. Everywhere in the world, people are trying to ensure that education is available to as many people as possible. However, in a country where on its best day, the average earning of the Kenyan person is 50,000, we have an education model that requires parents to pay 180,000, 120,000 for their children to get education. This is because our government does not view education as a necessity. Education still follows the model of the colonialists and their missionaries. Education is supposed to sift amongst us to ensure that those few of us who stand out get to be rewarded when the rest of us are left out. That is why it does not matter that probably 80-90% of people cannot afford the amount required to go for higher education. To our government, that is not a concern, because among the 10% who will be able to access that service, they will get the few overseers they need. The other essential services is health. Now, the state of our health infrastructure in this country is a sad thing to watch. Hospitals and medical assistance is almost non-existent for a significant chunk of this country. Most people have normalized the idea that you go to a hospital and there is a chance you do not get health care. But if our government is supposed to represent our collective will, then it beats logic why it would not be interested in having us healthy, because we all want to be healthy. And if the government represent our collective will, then one of the role of government is to ensure easy access to healthcare, and not only access to healthcare but affordable and quality healthcare. But again, that is not the case. Our government, acknowledging its colonial foundation, has still decided that this function should be outsourced. And again, it has been outsourced to the private sector. And I will repeat this as many times as possible. The goal of the private sector is to make profit, not to provide services, not to provide goods. Make profit. And they will go over and above to ensure that they make profit in whatever manner they deem fit. For them, the goal is profit. If you get to get healthy as they are gaining their profit, well and good. But our health as a community, as a group, our health is not of consideration. But how are we primary in our country when we have a government that allows the entire government-funded health sector to collapse? And then those who take up the service are more interested in exploiting us than in ensuring that we are healthy. But again, this goes back to the initial argument that our government is not interested in providing us with any essential service. Our government has no interest in ensuring that we, the people of Kenya, are primary in this society. The fourth essential service I think every government ought to provide is food security. The issue of food security in our country is a big shame. You see, the matters I've spoken about, security as we understand it today, healthcare as we understand it today, education as we understand it today, all those things can all be pegged up to the effect of modernity. But food security is integral to our human existence. From time immemorial, the only reason we are here is because even our ancestors were able to provide for themselves and their needs with regards to food. But somehow, in this modernized fashion, we as the group that has supposedly made strides in the journey of human evolution, we are unable to cater to our food needs. Every year we have government-led initiatives for begging for food around the world. And yet we have some of the most fertile lands on this continent. So instead of trying to dignify our failure to provide for our most basic need as a society. I would want us to think about a few things. For starters, if it is true that food is of the necessity that we all know or assume it is to be, why is it that our most fertile, our most dependable, our most arable lands have been secluded or set aside to grow luxury drinks for Europeans? And actually, not Europeans, because the greatest importer of our tea is Pakistan. So, why is it that our most fertile and our most productive lands have been set aside to provide a luxury drink for the Pakistanis when our brothers and sisters in Northeastern do not have enough food to eat? More and more people cannot afford food because a lot of our food is imported. And yet, the lands that we have, that are our rights, that should be used to primarily benefit us, have been set aside to benefit foreigners. These lands are also mostly owned by foreigners. So, how is it that we as a country continue to cede our most vital, our most valuable resource for the benefits of others? Secondly, the British killed 100,000 of our people 70 years ago, and they punished an entire community because of demanding their fair share of the lands in this country. And we have been told that we are an independent nation. Now we can no longer blame colonialism for our problems. So I need us to ask ourselves, where exactly did those lands go? Because we are not a colony, and the colonialists held all the valuable land. And the community that complained most about land still have the largest number of landless people in this country. Walk into any town in this country. Walk into any informal settlement in this country. If you don't find a significant chunk of that group speaking Kikuyu, then you're probably outside Kenya. So where are those lands? Those lands that are supposed to provide for our benefits. Where are those lands? The last essential service that I think a government ought to provide is essential infrastructure. And here, infrastructure takes both the form of policy and actual infrastructure. I think it is now commonly held knowledge across the world that in order to allow people to be the best versions of themselves, and that is what we want, because when people are the best versions of themselves, then the quality of life, the quality of experience in that community or that country also changes. So it is now an acknowledged fact that electricity, water, and internet are all but essential services in today's world. But how is it that water is still a luxury for most Kenyans? Access to clean water is still a luxury to most Kenyans. How is it that access to internet is still considered a privilege in 2025? How is it that electricity, a technology discovered over a century ago, how is it that that is still a privilege in this country in 2025? Again, this is because we have men and women in leadership who do not view us as primary. So, in their view, we do not require these services. We have not earned these services. But again, our government is supposed to represent our collective interest. So, how is denying us the most essential tools of survival advancing our collective interests? Another bit of the essential infrastructure would be a fair working judicial system. It is all but an acknowledged fact that in this country, justice has a price. the outcome of any disagreement, either between you and another individual or you and the state, is almost dependent on who has the more power. And here power comes in form of spending power. Whoever is endowed more gets to carry the day. But we are a country that is founded on democratic norms, where justice is supposed to be free and fair and accessible to all. But somehow this service is not available to a significant majority of us. But over and above these structural services, there is also the policy framework. We live in a country where we have perfected the art of copy-pasting the best frameworks and policies or guidelines for whatever sector of society you want to look at. But that is where the work of our government ends. In order to understand this, you have to look at it this way. Every year we have buildings collapsing and killing people in this country. And yet we have some of the best frameworks and building codes in the world. But why is it that they are not enforced? Because we do not have a framework towards ensuring that people get this service. Policy failures also affects the quality of the places we live. We live in some of the most disorganized or poorly planned settlements in this country. It will sound repetitive, but that is because from our foundation, large-scale settlement for Africans outside what was called reserves was never contemplated. The informal settlements came up because people did not have an alternative mechanism to housing. But we have been a free country for 60 years. We have some of the best planning guidelines you can trace on this planet. But somehow we have allowed the private sector to build some of the most horrible houses you will ever find. Houses that do not cater to people's needs, do not have social amenities. They are just dwellings. They are four-walled dwellings that, again, are fit for the African. But, you see, the failures of our government to ensure that essential infrastructure is available for our use, that would be highways, dams, proper schools. The failure of our government to provide these essential services is not an accident of history. It is actually built into the design. When we call ourselves the citizens of this country, when we look at ourselves as the primary beneficiaries of this country, this is where we go wrong. Our country is still primed for the benefit of foreigners. We still occupy the same position that our ancestors did. The government and the powers that be do not view us as an integral part of this society. And that is why Kenya continues to exist. Because whereas Kenya fails to stand the test of nationhood or statehood, if you evaluate what a country is supposed to provide to its citizens vis-a-vis what is supposed to take. The reason for that discrepancy is the following. Our country views us as residents of this country. We are not its citizens. For its citizens, the government maintains order. That is why the needs of foreigners are always addressed immediately. It provides essential services to its citizens. And when it does not, It provides mechanism for those people to have access to those essential services. Our government protects its citizens. Our government does promote the collective prosperity of its citizens. The problem we have as Kenyans is we have assumed that we are the citizens of this country and not its resident. And it is important to understand the difference between a citizen and a resident. A citizen enjoys all the rights and responsibilities of a nation. And in some nations, the government may allow citizens to get away with not holding their end on their responsibilities, but they get the privileges. Residents, on the other hand, are people who take up all the responsibilities of citizenship, but never the benefits. And that is the relationship we have with our government. We, the people of this country, we call ourselves Kenyans. But in the actions of our governments, in the policies of our governments, we are not its citizens. We are its residents. We are here to provide quotas for labor. We are here to provide collateral for loans. And we are here to pay taxes. Those are our responsibilities. But the citizens of this country, who far and large make up the elite class, are the beneficiaries of the responsibilities of the state to its citizen. And that is why, if you look at our policy framework, the way we are governed, the way our nation is structured, it is all geared towards ensuring that the elites have their way, that the needs of the elite are catered for. But this is an unsustainable model. If we are the primary inheritors of the land that is called Kenya, if it is true, like our constitution says, that we, the people of this country, get to enjoy the benefits of this country, get to enjoy all the rights and privileges of this country, then it is very important that we start imagining a different framework for our government. We imagine a different framework for the way our society is organized. It is only when we do this that we are going to start living a life that is dignified, a life that allows us to prosper. But more importantly, it is only when we understand this and we start changing how we look at our government that we can be able to start imagining and creating a country that works for us, a country that looks out for our prosperity, a country that maintains order for us, a country that provides us with all the essential services we require, a country that promotes our collective responsibility both here and abroad, a country that ensures we all thrive. And this is the conversation I keep inviting you to have. We must change the conversation about our nation to ensure that we are primary. We are the shareholders of this country and we get the most benefit from this country. And because we have the framework to be able to take charge and model a country that benefits or works for us, it is only right that we get to exercise that responsibility. I have been your host, Wanga. Thank you, and see you next time.